90 ships came out of the dawn, oars beating like a single black heart, and not one man aboard them was Westerosi. You have seen what they did. You have watched a dragon fall into the sea and a prince leap from its back into a forest of crossbow bolts. You have watched a town butchered to the last child and a great lord's treasures go up in flame. But here is the part the show will never stop to explain.
Forward!
The men who did all of this were not lords of the Seven Kingdoms. They had no dragons, they had no claim. They had only ships and rage and a grudge older than the war they'd been hired to win. And the man who commanded them, the man who killed the heir to the Iron Throne, is barely a name in your memory. By the end of this, you'll understand who the three daughters were, why they hated the dynasty they came to destroy, and how the single bloodiest sea battle in the history of the world was won by an admiral who then lost absolutely everything for it. This is the enemy behind the Gullet. This is the human face of fire and blood. This is the Black Dread. Subscribe if you would ride a frost dragon. Let's begin where the show won't. They called themselves the Triarchy. Westeros called them the Kingdom of the Three Daughters, and behind closed doors, something far cruder. 3 cities, Myr, Lys, Tyrosh. 3 colonial children of dead Valyria, scattered along the eastern edge of the narrow sea. And for most of their history, they despised each other. They fought over the disputed lands the way starving dogs fight over a bone, endlessly, bitterly, for nothing. Then, in 96 AC, the dogs stopped fighting each other. They turned on Volantis instead, broke her at the Battle of the Borderland, drove her out of the disputed lands, and swore what they grandly called an eternal alliance. 3 rivals bound into one fist, and to govern it, they seated a council, 33 magisters, 11 from each city, no king and no crown between them. 3 heads, 1 body. That should have been impossible. 3 cities that hated each other do not simply become friends. Remember that. It matters at the end, because the alliance had a sharp edge from the very first day. A Myrish Prince Admiral named Kragas Drahar led their fleets into the Stepstones, those broken islands between the continents where every pirate in the world made his nest, and he cleared them out. Westeros applauded. The trade lanes were safe again. For a moment, the 3 daughters looked like saviors. Then they started charging tolls. Then they got greedy. And then the Lyseni began taking more than coin. They took people, women, girls, comely boys, dragged off passing ships and sold into the pillow houses of Lys. Among them, a Westerosi noblewoman, Lady Johanna Swan, niece to the Lord of Stonehelm. Hold that name too. The 3 daughters certainly didn't think she mattered. Now, what does any of this have to do with a Targaryen civil war 30 years later? Everything. Because of one man and one grudge. In 106 AC, a Targaryen prince went hunting for a kingdom of his own in those very islands. Daemon Targaryen, with Lord Corlys Valerian's fleet at his back. Daemon waged the war for the Stepstones against the Triarchy. Outnumbered, he beat them anyway. And then he found Kragas Drahar, the man who had built the 3 daughters' power on the bones of murdered sailors, and killed him in single combat. By 109 AC, Daemon wore a driftwood crown and called himself King of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea. The Triarchy never forgot it. They had been humiliated in their own waters by a second son with a pet dragon. And in war, old wounds are weapons waiting for a hand to pick them up. That hand belonged to Otto Hightower. When the dance of the dragons broke open, the Blacks held the sea. Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, the greatest mariner alive, threw his enormous fleet across the Gullet and Blackwater Bay and choked the Greens off from the world. No supplies, no reinforcements. Strangulation by saltwater, and Otto Hightower, Hand of the King, sat in the Red Keep and saw the one thing that could break that chain. Not a dragon, a navy, an enemy navy. He reached across the narrow sea to the three daughters, the people who hated Daemon Targaryen more than anyone alive, and offered them an alliance. It took so long to arrange that King Aegon II lost his patience entirely, tore the chain of the hand from Otto's neck, and threw it to Criston Cole. Otto's scheme looked like the dithering of an old man, and then it worked. The High Council met in Tyrosh and said yes. 90 warships, Myrish, Lysine, Tyroshi, under the banners of the three daughters, slipped out of the stepstones and pointed their bows north toward the Gullet. At their head, the man the show gives you almost nothing about, Admiral Sharako Lohar of Lys. Here is what fate handed him before the real battle even began. Out on the water ahead of his fleet drifted a Pentoshi merchant cog, the Gay Abandon, escorted by 7 of the Sea Snake's own warships. Aboard her were 2 children, Aegon and Viserys, the youngest sons of Rhaenyra Targaryen, being smuggled to safety in Pentos until their mother won her throne. They sailed straight into 90 enemy hulls. The escorts were sunk or seized. The Gay Abandon was taken. 9-year-old Aegon flung himself onto the back of his young dragon Stormcloud and clawed into the sky as arrows and scorpion bolts tore the beast apart beneath him. He reached Dragonstone, screaming his warning, and his dragon died of its wounds the moment they landed. But his little brother had no dragon, only an egg in his arms. So a Tyroshi captain plucked Prince Viserys Targaryen off the deck and made him a prisoner, and handed him to Sharako Lohar. The Admiral of 3 foreign cities now held a son of the Queen of the 7 Kingdoms in chains, and the battle hadn't even started. It started on the 5th day of the new year, 130 AC. Sharako split his 90 ships into 2 squadrons and slid them up the Gullet to the north and south of Dragonstone, and at sunrise they struck out of the rising sun, straight into the Valyrian fleet, which never saw them coming. Then the sky answered. Jace, Rhaenyra's eldest, the heir to the Iron Throne, came down on his dragon Vermax and swept along a line of Lysine galleys, setting one ablaze then another. But these were not green levies fresh off a farm. These were Lysini sailors who had fought Daemon and Caraxes in the Stepstones years before. They knew how to kill a dragon. Every spear, every bolt turned toward Jace. And then the rest of the Dragonmont emptied itself into the fight. Silverwing, Sheepstealer, Sea Smoke, Vermithor, riderless and ridden, falling on the fleet, and the line of the 3 daughters shattered, galley after galley shearing away from the fire. It should have been a slaughter in the dragon's favor. It wasn't. Vermax flew too low. The accounts disagree on how he came down. A crossbow bolt through the eye, some say. A grapnel hurled from a deck, say others. But down he came into the sea, tangled in the rigging of a burning galley, dragged under as it sank. Jace leapt free of his drowning dragon and struck the water alive. He did not get out of it. Myrish crossbowmen filled him with bolts where he swam. The heir to the Iron Throne, killed in the water by foreign sailors whose cities most of his subjects could not have found on a map. So you might think this is where the 3 daughters lost. 5 dragons against ships of wood. The math only ends one way. But they didn't lose. They won. The fleet decided Dragonstone was too strong to storm, slid past it, and fell instead on the undefended Valyrian island of Driftmark. They sacked Spicetown so thoroughly it was never rebuilt. Its people butchered and left as carrion. They burned High Tide and every treasure the Sea Snake had spent a lifetime gathering, and cut down his servants as they ran. The blockade was broken. Otto Hightower's impossible scheme had worked. The Greens had their victory at sea, and it destroyed the 3 daughters utterly. Of the 90 ships that left the Stepstones, 28 limped home. 62 were gone. And of those 28 survivors, all but 3 were crewed by Lysini. The widows of the dead Merman and Tyroshi did the arithmetic and reached a single conclusion. Sharako Lohar, the Lysini admiral, had spent Myrish and Tyroshi lives and quietly held his own ships back. The Eternal Alliance, 3 rivals who should never have trusted one another, began tearing itself apart that very year. By 131 AC, it had collapsed into open murder, and Sharako Lohar, the man who won the bloodiest sea battle in the history of the world, the man who killed a dragon prince and captured a future king, did not die in glory. He was killed in a squabble over a woman. A rival cut him down for the favor of a courtesan in Lys, the most powerful woman in the city, the famous Black Swan. Her name was Johanna Swan, the same Westerosi girl the Lysini had stolen off a ship and sold into a pillow house, back when the three daughters thought she was nothing at all. She outlived the Admiral. She outlived the Alliance. The empire that enslaved her tore itself to pieces, and its greatest commander bled out over her favor. The dragons of the Gullet get songs. Jace gets remembered, but the navy that actually killed him, the 3 cities, the 90 ships, the Admiral, fade into a footnote, undone by their own victory, and a grudge they could never put down. 90 ships came out of the dawn, 28 crawled home, and not one of the men who mattered most that day was anyone you were ever told to remember. I'm your maester at the Black Dread. Check out more at www.theblackdread.com. See you there.